Good afternoon. This is Media Center, Ukraine, Odessa. We are starting our briefing day. Our guest now is Pavlo Koval, General Director of the Ukrainian Agrarian Confederation. We are going to discuss with him the grain agreement that expires on the 18th of March. And now this is the question, if it is going to be renewed. Mr. Koval, can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you well. Would like to welcome everyone. What Ukrainian agrarians should expect if the agreement is prolonged or if it is not prolonged? Yeah, so it's to be or not to be case. We know that there are quite difficult negotiations ongoing. There is the team of the Minister of Infrastructure, but there are also military representatives there. And we know that yesterday was quite intensive discussion between four representatives, the deputy heads of Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Turkey, the Russian Federation, and a representative of the UN. And as far as I understand, the negotiations have some separate protocol elements which are not published now. The Turkish party says that they relaunched grain agreement since the 9th of May, but we have a clear position. We do not have direct negotiations with the aggressor country. We can only specify some aspects and technical elements of the agreement. We emphasize at all platforms that this is important for us because this is a stable guarantee for the food safety. Without our products, we can see volatile prices at different platforms, and we are a supplier of different types of wheat, including the animal wheat, and we insist that we fulfill all our international liabilities within the given circumstances. This is an important situation for Ukraine, because if we can't sell the plant agri-food, including for export, affects the profit, including in foreign currency, for our producers. That's why, from the economic point of view, it is important for us to ensure rhythmic operation of the grain lanes and also to expand them. We have the issue with overloading of the Danube channel. There are 4 ports there, including Reni, Ismail. There are bottlenecks there. We also have alternative possibilities to export through railway and road transport through the Central and Central Eastern European countries to the rest of Europe. But there are some issues that hinder the process, not only with regard to grain products, but also as for the goods of group from the 1st to the 24th of the foreign economic activity. We are a player at the global market, and we should fulfill all our liabilities. Why do we have now the situation that we have with the grain lane? Because for the aggressor country, Russia, this is one of the tools of the hybrid war, together with the nuclear blackmail and other tools that it uses. These are the military activity theaters, and these are elements of the hybrid war. We emphasize everywhere that these are not our methods, that we will be able to overplay them at the higher level, at the higher diplomatic level, we will be able to formulate other tasks and will be able to fulfill them. We have been succeeding so far, and I believe that we will succeed in the future. The President Zelensky has announced the global food program, and this means that we have overplayed our enemy, the aggressor country. The enemy understands that there are issues at the front line in Donbass and other regions. That's why Russia tries to find other methods of impact. And Turkey says that it is the only player in the world that can directly communicate with Russian and Ukrainian allies. And they don't want to lose this status because they are going to have the parliamentary election on the 14th of May, and the Minister of Defense of Turkey also participates in this election campaign to become MP, and he will use it. But he's also important for negotiations, including for us, because the Turkish party allows us to have trilateral mirrored negotiations. And as for European countries, there are some expectations as for autumn elections in Poland. This also has an impact on the export and transit of our products through Poland, which is also an important corridor for us. So you now see the situation, and we can also see that our enemy tries to use it. We can also see that the prices at the domestic market has an insignificant but still the decreasing trend at the domestic market, including the different types of products like sunflower oil, etc. But we have been losing our traditional markets. And the export of the Russian grain has increased, contrary to the Ukrainian one. So at the domestic market, the prices have been decreasing, and at the external market, the prices have been raising, and also now it is occupied by our enemy, and this is not good for us. That's why we need to have proper foreign policy with our partners. This is the economic front for us, and they can support us to support the Ukrainian macroeconomics and the hryvnia's exchange rate. They will also help us to put pressure on our enemy through different tools, including sanctions, the prohibition of dual-use goods. We can do this only if we cooperate with our partners. So there are several layers of the situation: macroeconomic, geopolitical, and the internal domestic market of Ukraine. We should work with this, and it is important for us to continue this grain agreement. Have Ukrainian agrarians felt the delays in examination of vessels that were discussed last month? So we know that there were delays, and now the queues of vessels in Bosphorus, the vessels in ports of Odessa region still expect for loading, and how this affects the decrease of prices. The decrease of prices is a consequence of the situation, and we know that there is a huge queue of vessels in Bosporus. So these are the vessels that expect the possibility to call Ukrainian ports to be loaded. The statistics for the last 3 weeks, there is the clear trend in decreasing of number of vessels leaving the ports of big Odessa, there were decreases like by 40%, then 30, then 15%. So this is around 450,000 tons, and this is a huge number of vessels that could leave our ports with our products. Since the 8th of month, the decrease has increased by 8%. So 400,000 tons were loaded instead of 450,000. So the corridor is de facto operative, but there has been a significant decrease in the loaded products. Yes, because nobody has officially left the agreement, including Russia. But there is the joint Commission, and the conditions of Russia prevent vessels to be examined and to call Ukrainian ports. Before January, there were 6-7 vessels examined and loaded. Since January, we have been having less than 2 vessels per 24 hours, so there is decrease in 3 times. And there is a difference when we have the bulk vessels and also the vessels for liquid cargo, like oils. And there are also manipulations there. If they don't allow some tankers to call our ports, and they stop 2-3 processing factories in Ukraine. And the processed products are more expensive. If you have a factory in a port, like in Pivdенny port in Odessa, and you have thousands of tons of the ready products, Russia decides not to allow vessels to call that port for factory to face shutdown and for the people to be fired. This is also one of the tools of the Russian hybrid war. And we have a discussion. We need to select the vessels that we can allow, because they can be uploaded with the meal or with the animal food products, animal feed. And the prices are different. And if an operator buys the sunflower oil for one price and then has to wait for several months, the price, of course, changes. And this also affects the contract that the operators conclude. And the situation is different. For example, Russia works in India to decrease prices to the market segments where we used to send our products. The processing, the freight is not that profitable as it used to be. So the impact is negative. The businesses should think about changing this structure for sown areas. So they should think about the changes in the processing, and this requires investments, and we face issues with investments because we have the war in our country. So if the grain agreement will be renewed, we understand that the freight will be increasing. And before the war, the central Ukraine, Poltava Oblast, 1 ton of products carried by the railway, 1 ton of wheat was $22. To bring a ton of wheat from Cherkasy to Constanza, they should pay $195 for a ton. Who are the producers? These are small-sized and medium-sized farmers, because agrarian producers have their wagons at the stock exchange, and they are not affected that much. But the small-sized and medium-sized producers are affected, and this defines their financial stability and capability. You've mentioned about some issues inside our country with regard to the vessels that are allowed to enter our ports. Several weeks ago, there was a conflict in one of the ports of Big Odessa with regard to those vessels that were allowed to call the port. And now one of the companies says that it could not get quota for its vessels. Do you know about such situations in the ports of Big Odessa? The problem is there. I don't know if it's now in the format of conflict. There are official platforms where there are several representatives of the Ministry of Agrarian Policy, of the Ministry of Infrastructure, of Ukrainian port authorities, openly discuss this situation. I'm not sure that it is the conflict, and perhaps you mean something different. But there is the quota for calls for the vessels to be uploaded. And we need to understand what quotas we're now discussing. There is no quota for food. There are quotas for vessels and call of vessels. And if it's a tanker or bulker vessel, it can be disputable. Inside the country, we can discuss quotas, but Russia takes the list of 90 vessels in Bosporus and says that they are going to check some other vessels which are not critical for us. So this is how they disrupt this corridor. They seemingly work, but it took the whole day, for example, for them now to examine a vessel, and not a vessel that we ordered to be examined. So they just select for examination the vessels which are not ordered by Ukrainian terminals. That's how they disrupt these activities. That's why there is no sense in discussing quotas of calls of vessels, because the work of queues is disrupted. This information is published on the website of the Ukrainian seaport authorities. There are 3 tables for each of the port, and there is also a general table where you can information about call of vessels is agreed with 4 parties: Ukraine, the UN, Turkey, and Russia. And this is how we can track and trace this situation, and we can see what vessels spent a month in those queues, and what are the fines. Fines are huge, like $10,000 if there is the 35,000-ton tanker standing there. We can understand how it can affect the price and the margin. There are also the insurance risks, military insurance. Someone has to pay it for this. I'm not aware of the conflict situation, but there is a public discussion which is well known to all market operators. We have the question from the Austrian TV. Good afternoon. I have 2 questions. ORF Channel Austria. The first question about the bread corridor, and the condition is to ensure the supply of ammonia to Odessa. Is it possible physically and politically? The question is also about the Danube ports, Romania, and how important is the transportation by road and railway now. Thank you for the question. I will answer in Russian for convenience of everyone. We also need alternative instruments for export. Except for this grain agreement, we use Danube ports. We have been using 3 ports, and we are going to use 1 more port. And this is how we can export goods to Romanian ports, but there are limitations with tonnage. It cannot substitute the 3 ports of big Odessa. I'd like to remind that before the war, we operated through 17 seaports, and now only 3 seaports are operative. That's why we can see how effective the alternative tools can be to substitute the traffic that we need. When it comes to railway and road capacities, the traffic is also limited here, and this is not the question to the Ukrainian party. This is the question to the European parties, because the traffic through Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Moldova, Hungary, Bulgaria, if everything is ideal without our carriers, can reach 2 million tons and plus million tons the Danube River, and also the road transport 450,000 tons. So this can be up to 3 million if everything works ideally, and we need 6 million. That's why it will be difficult for us to solve all the transportation issues. But when we come to the higher level of these problematics, what can we have with macroeconomics? If we have good relations with our Western partners, then we can have the following scenario, that these stopped activities of the grain corridor will not affect that much the Ukraine hryvnias and United States dollars exchange rate, because we have some gold stocks, etc. But Ukraine can lose every time $800 million. But this is not that critical for the macroeconomics. The proper work with our partners will help us here, but we can have the gold and foreign exchange reserve that we can use, but we can have the sowing crisis in Ukraine that will affect the structure of the activities. I hope that I was able to answer the question. And also the first question is for the corridor Taliatsia-Odessa. As for the ammonia, we know that in the first version of the protocol, there was the Russian condition of the supply of ammonia from Odessa to Taliatsia. The technical capabilities are there, but I'm not sure that Russia fulfills all its liabilities. We know that after signing the first copy, the first version of the agreement, there was additional protocol as the result of the agreements between Turkey and the UN. So that was that also include ammonia. And it was not about 3 months as we signed, but it was about 3 years. I'm not sure here. Perhaps there are some additional kind of secret additional agreements between our partners, Turkey, the UN, and Russia, that can have some other details. So when it comes to Russian mineral fertilizers, and ammonia is the raw material for such fertilizers, we can see that there are mineral fertilizers produced of Russian ammonia in Turkey and the EU. Also, there were some limitations with the production of these type of goods. But now we are discussing the high level of negotiations involving war and political element. Thank you for answering the question. I would like to clarify one issue. And you mentioned that we can reach the sowing areas of 2022. Perhaps you have some information about the land that Ukraine has lost. These are approximate numbers. They change every day because of the combat activities along the 1,500 kilometers of the front line. Instead of 28 million hectares, we effectively processed 21 million hectares last year. So we can see that there is now lack of around 7-8. This is the part of Kharkiv, some Kharkiv Oblast, Donetsk, Luhansk, but there are some mined areas, and there are types of different types of the mined territories where we have the maps of mine territories, and they can be quickly demined. But there are some other areas that have chaotic projectiles and other explosive materials, and here the situation is different. And we know that there are some severe injuries that the operators of tractors get because they were blown up on some mine or some other explosives. So we understand that the demining is ongoing, but this is a very difficult process. They are agrarian companies that get licenses, and they become centers of humanitarian demining of lands, and they will be able to train and certify experts for these activities. Like company Nibolon that has already received such certificate that will work to clean its own lands, and it's obvious it will work with its partners to demine the territories and to train experts. The situation is difficult, but if we can reach 21 million hectares in 2023 and also to sow crops for 2024, we will be able to preserve the level of activities that we had in a difficult 2022. But I think that the front line will be shifted to the Ukrainian-Russian borders, and we will have to demine more and more hectares. And this is a very important process. We need to understand that the occupied territories that of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, which was the biggest player when it came to winter wheat. It was not the biggest oblast when it came to gross harvest, but when it came to the sowing areas. Luhansk Oblast used to be quite a major player, and it is also significantly affected. We need to work with this. But there is the issue with the northern oblasts and Kiev, Kharkiv, Chernigiv oblasts. And if we cannot demine them in the nearest future, the arables there will be occupied by forests. And also, those were the shares of people who got rent for arable activities, and we need to think about how to compensate that. If the person was a pensioner and the only source of profit was the rent for arables, if those territories are not processed, how the state can compensate that profit? And does the state has a plan? Are there any priorities in terms of demining? And this is element, and there are multiple elements of this issue. This is the social economic problem, not only when it came to demining. Thank you, Mr. Koval, for joining us today. We will invite you in the future. Thank you, and have a nice day. Thank you, too. That was Pavlo Koval. At noon, we will have the next briefing about the new missiles that Ukraine has recently got. Stay tuned.